Order. Before I call the Honourable Member for Putney to move the motion, I'd like to inform members that the Parliamentary Digital Communications team will be conducting secondary filming during today's debate for their series of procedural explainers. Order. I will call Fleur Anderson to move the motion, and I will then call the Minister to respond. There will not be an opportunity for the member in charge to wind up, as is the convention, for a 30-minute debate. Order, order. Fleur Anderson to move the motion.
Thank you very much, Ms Vaz. It's an honour to serve under your chairship for this very important debate on Knife Crime Awareness Week, which is this week. It's important to raise the urgent need to tackle knife crime across the country. As a mum, it's a very big concern for me for every time my children leave and walk around the streets, and every time we hear of a life lost, usually a young life lost, so brutally, it breaks my heart.
Would the Honourable Member give it?
Yes, certainly.
I thank the Honourable Member for giving away and holding this important debate. And indeed, it is a tragedy whenever any family loses a young life. Last month in Moss Side in Manchester, we lost Prince Walker Ayani, a 17-year-old boy who was stabbed and sadly later died in hospital from his injuries. Does my honourable friend agree with me that any life lost, particularly of a young person, to knife crime is unacceptable, and that this Tory government is simply not doing enough to tackle knife crime on our streets?
Anderson.
I thank the Honourable Member for raising the issue of Prince, for remembering him in this debate. It's on his behalf and on behalf of so many young people who have lost their lives that we're holding this debate, and we don't want to see any more of this at all. I agree, it's unacceptable. Since 2015, knife crime has risen by a staggering 80%, with some of the steepest increases in towns and suburbs, devastating families across the country. Despite promising more than 16 times to ban dangerous weapons from Britain's streets, the government has dragged its feet, and its policy still leaves gaping loopholes, which means lethal blades like ninja swords are still legally available to buy. There were nearly 50,000 police-recorded offences involving a knife or sharp instrument in England and Wales in 2023. And very tragically, there were 244 murders involving a knife or sharp instrument in England and Wales in the 12 months to March 2023. 244 murders in just 12 months. 78 young people aged under 25 were murdered with a knife or sharp object in the 12 months to March 2023. 10 of those were aged under 16. In their name, in their memory, we must take action. I've been out for an evening with my local police violence reduction unit, and I pay tribute to the police who are tackling this head-on. Every time the door opened of that van, they did not know what they were going to face when they were going out there. I certainly will.
I thank my honourable friend for giving way and making such a passionate speech on this really important issue, an issue that we cannot afford to politicise. And on that, she mentioned violence reduction units. We have a fantastic violence reduction unit in London working with communities, including communities in my constituency. Those VRUs have been funded directly from the Mayor of London's office. Does she agree with me that the government needs to continue working and funding those violence reduction units, where we see youth workers essentially being a line of defence, where we see those youth workers mentoring our young people, turning them away from crime? That will only happen if we have adequate resources in our VRUs.
Fleur Anderson.
I thank my honourable friend and fellow London MP for raising that. The violence reduction units are really important, and also learning from what works from youth workers on the ground, from the police on the ground. And I will be talking about building on what works and using that to tackle knife crime in my speech. Certainly.
Bringing this forward, the Honourable is right to do that, and obviously to add Madam Chair, to add a Northern Ireland perspective to it. Just this week, the PSNI in Northern Ireland recently warned of the surge in illegal import of knives disguised as belt buckles in Northern Ireland. That's been happening since January of this year. And it's clear there's a market for hidden knives. And does the Honourable Lady not agree that this must be something that is addressed in a coordinated fashion and method in each constituency across all of the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland, ever mindful the ministers responsible for England, but all the regions also have to follow suit?
Thank the Honourable Member for bringing up. I didn't know about knives disguised as belt buckles, and that just shows how legislation has to be good enough to keep ahead of every new device, new weapon that comes up, and I hope the Minister will be responding on that issue at the end of this debate. I've also worked with organisations across South West London when I was working in a youth centre before I was an MP to look at what we can do as a community and learn from public health approach to tackling knife crime, and I've been a youth worker. Certainly.
Yes, on that point, in my constituency, the Streetwise project has had significant success in raising awareness among young people about the dangers of carrying knives. Would she agree with me about the critical role in education in preventing knife crime, and that it's vital that we do all we can to support such community-led initiatives that deliver vital education and mentoring to our children?
Thank the Honourable Member for raising that. I absolutely do agree. Education and prevention is absolutely crucial to this, and I will be talking more about that. And I also thank the member for raising the organisation working in her constituency, and I'd like to pay tribute to other charities working to tackle knife crime as well, including the Ben Kinsella Trust, who are organising the knife crime awareness week, and have written a report, Keeping Young People Safe. Also, Knives Not Lives, Street Doctors, the Damilola Taylor Trust, Justice for Ronan Kanda, and Triple P. They are just some of the many organisations working across the country who are working to tackle knife crime, and often education is the key. Knife crime destroys lives, devastates families, and creates fear and trauma in communities. Labour has made it our mission to halve knife crime within 10 years of a Labour government. It is right to be ambitious to change this situation. For 14 years, the Conservatives have failed to grip this epidemic and take the action necessary to get these dangerous weapons off our streets. The government's response has been wholly inadequate. The serious violence strategy is more than 5 years out of date. The serious violence task force was disbanded, and everyone knows from their own communities that too little is being done to divert young people away from violence and crime. Youth services are an essential part of that. I've spoken many times about youth services. I wanted this opportunity to speak again. The YMCA research shows that in real terms, expenditure on youth services has been slashed by 73% since 2010-2011, which equates to a £1.1 billion loss. And the number of youth sentences has been cut drastically from 917 in 2011 to just 427 in 2023. 427 across the country. It's not enough. No wonder we are seeing this epidemic of knife crime. Half of young people don't have access to a youth service. Too often when teenagers are caught with knives, nothing happens. There's no action, no support to stop a spiral into even more devastating crime. Too often nothing is done when there are signs that a young person is getting into trouble, being groomed by gangs, lost in a dangerous online world. Not enough parenting support as well. Too often when teenagers say they don't feel safe or they're struggling themselves with trauma or abuse, no one listens, no help is provided. This is the reality of Tory Britain. But Labour will change this. We will extend the ban. Certainly.
Recently in Ammanford, in my constituency, in Amman Valley School, there was a horrific incident where a pupil attacked two teachers and another pupil, and miraculously nobody died. The injuries for one of the teachers was especially horrific. Does she agree with me that there needs to be a focus on weapons in schools? Because for me, fundamentally, I think the development in some of the Carmarthenshire of all places, weapons being produced in schools is extremely worrying.
Thank the member for raising that very horrific sounding incident. And I would agree, weapons in schools are extremely concerning and need to be tackled. There needs to be a holistic approach to this. It can't be just weapons in one place or another. It can't be education in one place or another. It can't be one particular service. It needs to be in the round. And weapons in schools is definitely one of them. Labour will extend the ban on zombie knives to ninja swords. Labour will establish an end-to-end review of online knife sales. Labour will close the loophole which allows online marketplaces to sell dangerous knives. And, very importantly, Labour will introduce a new Young Futures programme to establish new youth hubs with both mental health workers and youth workers. This new Young Futures programme will draw on up to £100 million a year based on combining existing commitments to fund youth hubs with mental health staff and youth workers in every community, paid for by ending tax breaks for private schools, and mentors in pupil referral units and youth workers in A&E, paid for by full cost recovery for gun licensing and a programme of public sector reform, to deliver a targeted programme in every area to identify the young people most at risk of being drawn into violent crime and build a package of support that responds to the challenges they're facing. This will be achieved by bringing together services at a local level to better coordinate delivery of preventative interventions around the young person, rooted in a strong evidence-based, and to develop a national network of young futures hubs and end this postcode lottery of better youth services in some places than others, to bring local services together, deliver support for teenagers at risk of being drawn into crime or facing mental health challenges, and where appropriate, deliver universal youth provision, that which has been cut so badly by the Conservative government. And we will also deliver youth workers in A&E units, custody centres, communities, and mentors in pupil referral units. There will be tough consequences for carrying a knife under a Labour government. A Labour government will end the empty words and apology letters for knife possession, guaranteeing sanctions and serious interventions for young people carrying knives. And there will be tough new laws to restrict the sale of knives. A Labour government will implement a total crackdown on the availability of knives on Britain's streets. No more loopholes, no more caveats, no more false promises. The government has published 16 press releases about zombie knives since 2015, yet despite repeated promises to toughen the rules, a full ban is not in place. Labour will urgently legislate to ban zombie-style knives, introduce tough criminal sanctions on tech executives who allow knife sales on their online marketplace, and conduct a rapid review of online knife sales from the point of purchase through to delivery, and in particular strengthen ID checks and checks conducted by Royal Mail and Border Force for UK-bound parcels. There are ways to take action. This can be done. We can stop the increase of knife crime and see an end to this. I'd like to thank the Ben Kinsella Trust again and recommend their report, Keeping Young People Safe. In particular, the need to work with young people in primary schools, as that's where some of the belief systems about knife carrying start. And I'd like to urge the government to take more action to end knife crime. Thank you very much.
I expect the debate to end at 16:47. I'll move to the next debate. The question is that this House has considered Knife Crime Awareness Week. Sarah Edwards.
Thank you. And it is an honour to serve under your chairship, Mrs Vaz. And may I congratulate the Honourable Member for Putney on securing this incredibly important debate. When I speak to my constituents in Tamworth, I hear about how worried they are about the increasing antisocial behaviour. And I recently attended a town centre forum in St Editha's Church, meeting with local businesses who told me about how their experiences of antisocial behaviour and crime in the town centre is impacting the local economy. Reports of knife crime continue to rise, and in the last couple of months alone, a serious stabbing took place in Tamworth nightclub in the early hours of the morning. With resources under strain, I am pleased to see that Staffordshire Police's Ditch the Blade campaign, as well as knife banks, are being located across the constituency in places like St Editha's Church and St Martin's Church and Sacred Heart Church. But with cuts to the police, it's becoming increasingly clear that initiatives like this cannot succeed without a greater focus on tackling knife crime from a number of angles. In Tamworth, I am proud of organisations like Changes Tamworth, who provide a lifeline for those in a mental health crisis and at risk of suicide, but who now also, by referral from the police, offer anger management courses and mental health support to recent offenders on their last strike, and in doing so, they help to reduce the levels of violence and reoffending in our community. But they need support. Not enough is being done at the national level to combat what is becoming an epidemic in knife crime, with some of the steepest increases in towns and suburbs, just like my constituency. And since 2015, knife crime has risen by 77%, and the government has failed to act. I urge the government to adopt Labour's bold plan to tackle knife crime by rebuilding security on our streets and building confidence in the criminal justice system. This includes putting youth workers in our A&E units, as well as reinvigorating a national network of youth hubs to bring local services together and deliver support for teenagers. We could be building on the work done by groups like Mercy and Boxing Club, who successfully won a funding bid to convert a community centre in Tamworth, left derelict by the Conservatives, leaving our young people with nothing to do. Or we could be making sure that groups like Tamworth Table Tennis have a long-term base to ensure that we had a wide range of activities for young people. Labour will also clamp down on knife sales and create a new law on the exploitation of children and young people by criminal gangs, and establish a new cross-government coalition to end knife crime, bringing together political and community leaders with a role to play in tackling knife crime and keeping young people safe. Thank you.
Phil.
Thank you, Mrs Vaz. It is a pleasure, as always, to serve under your chairmanship, and I thank and congratulate the member for Putney for securing this afternoon's debate, and the member for Tamworth for managing to get in and make her contribution as well. This is an incredibly important topic. Any of us who have attended the funeral of a young person who has been the victim of knife crime will know that. I recall very painfully attending the funeral of 15-year-old Eliane Andam, who was murdered in Croydon on September the 27th last year at 8:30 in the morning, and seeing the grief of her family, her parents, Michael and Dorcas, and her little brother, Kobe, is something I will never forget. And I think all of us need to keep in mind the tragic stories of young people who have lost their lives, and the importance, therefore, of the work we're doing in making sure we protect as many as we possibly can. Now, it's worth just, I think, setting out some of the facts, because when we see reports on social media about knife crime and individual tragic incidents, it sometimes creates the impression that knife crime is, or homicides caused by knife crime, are more prevalent than they are. And, you know, we need to keep in mind just where exactly we are in terms of progress made. So, in the year running to March 2010, there were 620 homicides across England and Wales. Last year, 2023, there were 577, a reduction in the number of homicides over that period, even though the population of the country has grown. Over the same period, violence reported by the Crime Survey of England and Wales, according to the Independent Office for National Statistics, the most reliable source of data on offending violent crime, was down by 44%. Another measure we use to really get to the heart of how much knife crime there is happening is we look at the number of hospital admissions following injury by a knife. And since 2019, for people under 25, that has reduced by 26%. So there has been, as you can see from those figures, quite considerable progress made, with reductions in homicide since 2010, reductions in violence since 2010, and a reduction in hospital admissions following a knife injury in the 5 years we've been tracking that since 2019. But despite all of that progress, all of those improvements, there is more that needs to be done, because every single death is a tragedy, every single injury is a tragedy as well. And that is why we are determined, the government is determined, to do everything possible to end the scourge of knife crime up and down the country. Now, part of that, of course, is making sure the police have adequate resources. We do now have, of course, record police officer numbers across England and Wales. Last March, we hit 149,566. That's more than we've ever had at any time before. And the police funding settlement this year is also at a record level. It went up by the frontline budget spent by police and crime commissioners, went up by £922 million this financial year compared to the last financial year. So the resources are being made available to the police, but we need to do more than that. Now, we heard some references to banning different kinds of knives. So we have been progressively widening the scope of knife bans. Far more knives are banned today than was the case in 2010. The most recent tranche of bans will come into force on September the 24th this year, which will ensure that all zombie-style knives and machetes, and certain kinds of machetes, will be banned, which is quite right. Curved swords, of course, have been banned since 2008. So wherever we see evidence that a particular kind of knife needs to be banned, we will take action to do that. But I would remind the House that possession of any kind of knife, even a kitchen knife, in a public place without reasonable excuse is itself a criminal offence, punishable by up to 4 years in prison. Of course, I give way.
and by the Minister's response to the Honourable Lady in relation to what we're saying. I mentioned in my intervention about the buckle knives that the PSNI in Northern Ireland have indicated are something new that's coming through. I know the law, and I think the Minister is right, that the law will encompass all of these issues, but I just wonder if it had been possible to perhaps contact some of the regional police forces to ascertain some of the issues that they have as well. I think it helps to bring forward better legislation, if you don't mind me asking. Thank you.
Well, of course, we're always very open to consulting with police forces around the country, including Police Scotland and, of course, the Police Service of Northern Ireland, to make sure we're picking up these trends, as the Honourable Member says, very quickly indeed. Now, we also heard some discussions around the online sale of knives, and, of course, the Online Safety Act passed through Parliament last, I think, October or November. When it is fully commenced, and Ofcom are currently consulting on the codes of practice to implement that, will impose obligations for the first time on social media platforms and online marketplaces, things like Facebook Marketplace, to ensure that they are applying the law, to take proactive steps to make sure that under 18s, for example, can't buy knives online. And the Criminal Justice Bill, currently going through Parliament, is increasing the penalty for selling a knife to an under 18 to up to 2 years. So the Online Safety Act, which I worked on with my right honourable friend, the member for East Hampshire, when he was Security Minister, will do a great deal to prevent the sale of knives online. Now, we also heard some discussion around prevention. That is critically important. That is why violence reduction units up and down the country, there are 20 violence reduction units, are receiving about £55 million of funding a year. And next year, we're going to increase that by around about 50%. And that 50% increase in violence reduction unit funding will make sure that those preventative interventions are made, funding things like mentoring schemes, cognitive behavioural therapy, diversionary sporting activity and so on, to make sure young people who are at risk of getting onto the wrong path can be helped. We are doing that in partnership with the Youth Endowment Fund, who have got £200 million to invest. They do research on which interventions actually work, because there are some interventions that on the face of it look like sound like they might work, but in fact they don't have any impact. So the Youth Endowment Fund do research into which of these interventions really have an impact. And in fact, I was discussing these with their Chief Executive, John Yates, just a few hours ago. And a new initiative that we're going to be pioneering with the Youth Endowment Fund this autumn is a piece of work starting off in 4 local authorities, but I hope to be expanded to all local authorities, to identify in each area the 100 young people at risk of getting into serious violence. So this is not youngsters who are already involved in serious violence, who are being supported already, but younger people, maybe in their early teens, who are at risk of getting into serious violence, where we can make an early intervention to stop them ending up on that path. And if those pilots in those 4 local authorities are successful, as I think they will be, then part of that extra violence reduction unit funding I mentioned could support the rollout of that nationally, which I would certainly like to see. Now, that's around the sort of prevention, the bans, the Online Safety Act, the violence reduction units. Those measures are all preventative, but we also need to take proper enforcement action. And that does include the use of stop and search, which I haven't heard mentioned this afternoon so far. Stop and search is important. In London, it used to take 400 knives a month off the street. But sadly, in London, the use of stop and search has gone down by 44% over the last 2 years. And it may be no coincidence, whereas in the rest of the country it's been maintained, it may be no coincidence that knife offences in London have gone up at the same time stop and search has gone down, which bucks the national trend. And I was very pleased the Commissioner, Sir Mark Rowley, said that he would be increasing the use of stop and search, done, of course, lawfully, done, of course, respectfully, but it does take knives off the streets and it does save lives. And I've heard victims' families say to me, I wish the person that killed my child, typically as a young man, killed my son, had been stopped and searched before their child or their son was murdered. So the stop and search is a really important tool that does need to be used. But to support that, we are investing in developing some new technology, which is not ready to deploy yet, but I hope it will be ready to deploy experimentally by the end of this year, which is technology that allows police officers to scan someone at a distance of, say, 10 or 20 feet, so maybe the distance that we're standing apart now, to detect a knife at a distance in a crowded street, to enable officers to identify and remove those knives from people who are carrying them. We're investing about £3.5 million right now in just expediting the development of that technology. I saw some of it demonstrated last week. It is not quite ready to deploy, but it's very close. And as soon as it is ready, I'll want it to be trialled, and I'll certainly be volunteering Croydon, the borough that I represent in Parliament, to trial it at an early stage. Perhaps Wandsworth might want to volunteer as well, and perhaps Tamworth also, to get those knives off our streets. I would also say, when it comes to technology, that the use of facial recognition, both retrospective facial recognition and live facial recognition, is really helping us to catch people, perpetrators of knife crime, but other crimes as well, who would otherwise not be caught. And we debated this a lot in the Criminal Justice Bill committee stage, but this technology is getting more powerful every day, and it is enabling the police to catch criminals who would not otherwise get caught. So the use of facial recognition, obviously within guidelines and respecting privacy and so on, will really help us take more dangerous people off our streets. Mrs. Vaz, the other thing which we're pushing is hotspot patrolling. So in areas where there is antisocial behaviour and serious violence, all the evidence shows that hotspot patrolling helps stop criminal offences. And so we've given police and crime commissioners additional money for the current financial year over and above their regular budget. It totals about £66 million, of which London, I think, is getting about £9 million. And that is to fund hotspot patrolling in areas where the police have identified a particular problem. And we know the evidence from pilots last year shows that intensive hotspot patrolling reduces antisocial behaviour and serious violence where it occurs. So that money, I'm expecting, will fund about 1 million hours this current financial year of extra hotspot patrolling to keep our streets safer. So look, in summary, it's good that violence and homicide are both lower now than they were in 2010, but there is more to do. Every single death is a tragedy, and it behoves all of us to do everything we can. I've set out our plans both in the preventative arena and in the law enforcement arena, and I'm sure all of us would want to work with our police forces in our constituencies to make sure the police have the support they need in order to keep the public safe and to catch perpetrators.
Thank you, Minister. The question is that this House has considered Knife Crime Awareness Week. As many as are of that opinion say aye. Aye. Of the contrary, no. The ayes have it. The ayes have it. Order, order. Go straight to the next.